Continuing from the previous movie, let's now art direct the color temperature of our background and environment using an OSL black body node. I've got active shade running, and when that's finished, let's make a clone of this rendered frame window. Clone rendered frame window, so we can compare that later, and just minimize that. Open up the material editor, and in the last movie, we instanced this HDRI environment map from the environment and effects dialog into the material editor. So if we make changes to this node, then they will be reflected in our active shade. Double click that in order to load its parameters. And once again, we have controls like exposure and tint. But the tint parameter doesn't give us a lot of control over white balance specifically. We can use a black body node to enter in a Kelvin value in degrees, and that'll give us a lot more control over white balance. We'll need a couple more nodes in the graph for that. Over in the view, right-click, and you get a pop-up menu to create a new node. Choose Maps, OSL, Utility, Black Body. And that node is created. Double-click it to load its parameters, and rename it. We'll call it ENV Kelvin. This is going to create a color that corresponds to a particular color temperature. We need to combine it with our image file. That's done using a multiply node. Once again, right-click in the view and choose Maps, OSL, Math Color, Multiply Color. This is a form of the multiply node that works with color nodes. And each one of these has an output and one or more inputs. Connect the output of the HDRI environment to input A on the multiply node. Connect the color output of the black body node to input B. Double-click on that multiply node and rename it as well, ENV Balanced. We need to assign this multiply node as our environment map. So go back into the rendering menu to Environment. Once again, we got the Environment and Effects dialog. And we saw earlier that we could drag and drop between these two windows. To assign a map as an environment map, you need to click on the output port. Click and hold that button and you get a wire. Drag over to the other window. And when you get to the environment map, release the mouse. You get the Instance Copy dialog. We want to choose Instance, once again, so that the changes we make in the material editor will actually take place in the environment as well. So choose Instance and click OK. And that may take a moment to update because it's going to need to compile the OSL shading network. We can close the Environment and Effects dialog. And Active Shade is running, and we see it looks pretty poor, but that's because of the default parameters for the black body node. Double-click the black body node to load its parameters. We have two fields, min and max, where we can enter in values in degrees Kelvin. We can see that there's a gradient across the image here. We usually want to use the same value for min and max so that there's no gradient. If we wanted a neutral white, we could set min to 6500 degrees Kelvin or D65. We can likewise set the max to 6500. In the active shade, that looks pretty good, but I want to push this a little bit and make it considerably more blue because the sky is so blue. I'll set the min and max both to 9500 degrees Kelvin. And now I've got a pretty good color balance, I think. We also have the intensity down here, and that'll allow us to control the exposure a little bit. We'll set that to 1.25 and press enter. And now it's just a little bit brighter. After letting that render for a while, we can once again clone the rendered frame window and close the active shade. Close the material editor as well and compare these two renderings. I've got my other rendering minimized down here, and we can see on the left the raw image, and on the right the one that we've color corrected by multiplying with a black body node. That's how to white balance an environment map.